If there's a show I've watched the most in my life, it's Avatar: The Last Airbender. But if there's a show I've watched the second most in my life, it would be Gravity Falls. This show is a certified banger. I loved watching the show as a kid, and I felt like rewatching it because, you know, nostalgia and all that. So why not get some content out of it? You know, welcome to YouTube. Rewatching it for this video, I was worried it wouldn't hold up, but lo and behold, it holds up incredibly well, and I had a blast. But today, I decided to watch all 40, technically 41, episodes of Gravity Falls and rank them based on quality. Even though I grew up with this show, I set nostalgia completely aside and focused on what the episode presented and ranked it fairly. I know I say this about all of my rankings, but this one was particularly fun, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. And of course, remember that this is my opinion, and if you disagree, feel free to let me know in the comments. But enough lollygagging, let's go ahead and start with the worst episode of Gravity Falls, which is... The worst episode of Gravity Falls is Roadside Attraction. This one honestly pisses me off, but probably not for the reason you'd expect. So this episode is not inherently that egregious. It has the signature Gravity Falls charm, there's actually some really good and memorable jokes in this one, and the villain is honestly shockingly disturbing. However, this episode especially falls flat in both placement in the season and central plot. The biggest problem is that this episode is placed in between Not What He Seems and the Weird Mageddon finale. Instead of focusing on Ford or Bill or anything that would have plot relevance in the finale, they just take a boring road trip. Why are we doing this? And especially, why are we doing this without Ford or mentioning him at all? Was J.K. Simmons not available or something? Because this feels like such a weird tonal and plot shift. That annoys me a lot. I mean, I'm fine with taking a breather between heavier plot-focused episodes, but this feels like an unnecessary filler episode that could have either been scrapped or moved to earlier in the season when it would have made more sense. Being placed here ruined a lot of what this episode had going for it. Also, for some reason, despite the second episode of the season ending the Dipper and Wendy plotline, this episode forces it back into light and makes it a big deal. And I honestly hate that. I wasn't a fan of the plotline to begin with, and now it's being shoveled down my throat like how I eat IHOP pancakes on a summer Saturday. And the fact that the central plot is that Dipper has to flirt with a bunch of girls and get better at flirting or something, and then, oh wow, he gets exposed, cause why not just throw in a random liar exposed trope? That just sucks, man. Also, what? Why does Candy now have a crush on Dipper? Like, where did that come from? Yeah, this episode is not that good. And you wanna know something? This episode is a 6.3 out of 10. Yeah, that's the lowest Gravity Falls goes. Like I said, this episode is actually kind of solid in some places. If it were moved and tweaked a little, I probably would have put this way higher. Honestly, it feels kind of weird to not be angry at a bottom placement. Usually I'm writhing with anger here, but I'm just kind of disappointed. A show this good deserves at least one steaming pile of garbage, but no. This episode is just kind of the middle child of Gravity Falls, just kind of the forgotten child that isn't really that relevant to the show as a whole. I vaguely remember skipping this episode a lot as a kid, and while I found more enjoyment this watch through, yeah, it's not that great. But the show can only get better, right? So let's move on to the next episode. It doesn't get that much better. I've never been a huge fan of The Legend of the Gobblewonker. Honestly, it was a really close call between this and Roadside Attraction for the bottom pick, but this one is just slightly better, and let's start with the good stuff. I really like the message of this one, of Stan wanting to spend time with the kids. It hit me way harder on rewatch, and I just thought it was really sweet. The jokes are, for the most part, pretty solid. I love the camera gag, the chainsaw beaver joke, and but her aim is getting better. Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss's misadventures are real fun in this one, and they have a really fun dynamic off the bat, which is really impressive for the second episode of a show like this. The music is really solid in this one, and the episode as a whole just has a sense of fun to it that I really clicked with. The rest isn't really that bad, just kinda not that great. The robot reveal has always felt pretty lackluster to me. I like that it shows that McGucket is smart and good with technology or whatever, and he's delightful, but something about that scene has always kind of felt unsatisfying, and I think a real monster actually could have been really fun. Also, why is McGucket's son never seen again outside of that one newspaper shot? Like, he's in this and literally nothing else. That's really weird to me, but it's not a fault on this episode, just something I noticed on this rewatch. rewatch. Gravity Falls' first couple episodes are tonally pretty different from the rest of the show, and this episode suffers heavily from that quite a bit. Some of the jokes go on slightly too long, timings can be a little weird, and some things are not quite as good as they could be. And that's one of the main things that drags this episode down a few spots. It just feels a little off, even more so than the pilot, which we'll get to in a second. Not too much that it's bad, just noticeably weaker in certain areas, especially the writing and dialogue. That being said, this episode is real solid and I liked it overall. Also, the time traveler is still impressive to me even after all these years. It feels like a sin to put Tourist Trap this low, but it's true, I'm sorry. Tourist Trapped is still a really fun time and an amazing pilot for the show. I'm honestly impressed how well this episode sets up the major mysteries and characters of the show, especially the mystery of the author. It just feels so intriguing right off the bat. And the introduction of the journal is a really cool draw for the show. The hiding spot for the journal has always kind of confused me though. You're telling me the journal was hidden 1 foot underground and the way you find it is by flicking one switch that you can do by accident? Given what the rest of the show has shown, I think Ford would have come up with something a little more advanced than that. That's not a major gripe I have with the episode, just something I've always been confuzzled about. Mabel and Dipper are set up so well in this episode. I think of the "yay, grass" line probably once a week. I'm not joking with you. I really like the gnome boyfriend, especially the foreshadowing with the journal. That's just so clever. There are honestly way more solid jokes in this one than I remembered, and I laughed quite a surprising amount. I mentioned this with the Gobblewonker segment, but the biggest problem with this episode is the tone and timing. Some of the jokes just feel a little off, and a lot of the moments can feel a little weak, especially when compared to the later episodes. But overall, this episode is iconic. Great moments, really fun final fight, great setups for the show. It's a really fun time.
Trying to tell you that Norman is not what he seems.
Boss Mabel is fine. It's an episode that sure does exist. Okay, it's not that mediocre. This is a pretty fun episode. Shockingly, there aren't that many jokes in this one, at least not that I saw. I only laughed a couple of times, which is weird for Gravity Falls. The central conflict is real fun. Mabel being the boss of the Mystery Shack and trying to be nice but ending up becoming Stan. That's just a really solid concept that this episode makes pretty enjoyable. Couple that with Grunkle Stan going on a reality TV show and you have a solid plot, and the ending is really funny. I still get a chuckle out of the final word of the game show being please. That made me laugh pretty hard. Although Pabracadabra was a close second. I've never liked the monster in this one. I do like the jokes surrounding it and its defeat, and the singing salmon joke was top tier, but something about it felt kind of forced, like we need some action, so throw in a random fight that honestly could have been removed and the episode would still play out the same. Not terrible, but it's just never felt special to me, and that's kind of how this episode felt. It's got its moments for sure, but overall it can't be placed much higher in my opinion. It's just nothing really crazy or special. Headhunters is where the show starts to take off. I've always really liked the mystery in this one, and it's a really fun twist on a murder mystery that I'm shocked Disney was chill with, especially with how many times the episode drops the word murder. Also, the reveal is so fun, and a really cool idea of having these wax figures come to life and want revenge on Stan. Just top notch right there. I'm also a sucker for some Blubs and Derlin moments, and this episode has a lot of them, which is so delightful. Also, it's crazy how this episode foreshadows Stan having a brother, because having a wax figure that looks exactly like him getting murdered could have reminded him of Ford. That could definitely be unintentional, but I'm gonna treat it as a cool foreshadowing moment, because why not? This is also where the show starts to leave that awkward tone and timing thing that I talked about. It starts to get its own vibe and starts to write the jokes a little more realistically and more cleverly. A few episodes throughout the show still have it sometimes, but this episode is where it starts to not be the majority of the episode in jokes. And this episode is just really solid all around, and I had a lot of fun with it. A lot more fun than I was expecting. Good job. Little Gift Shop of Horrors. It's fine. The episode overall is very weird, but not in the typical Gravity Falls weird way. The main storyline is Stan telling stories to a random guy that he's trying to sell stuff to, and that's fine. It's creative for sure, but the stories overall feel kind of lacking, and the fact that the guy ends up as an attraction that we never see again is weird to me. Like, why would anyone in their right mind drink a potion from this guy? It feels mysterious, but also unrealistic and just kind of weird. Each short story told is fine on their own, fun, but with the context of Bottomless Pit, it just kind of feels like a worse version of that. The Handwich story is funny at times, but not as charming or fun as it could be. Also, it's literally just the Truth Teeth segment, but with a weirder device. It's just not as good. The Smart Pig one was alright. I like the jetpack. That was fun. Neil deGrasse Tyson was an interesting pick to play the pig. Nothing terrible, just kind of a weird choice in my opinion. The stop motion segment, on the other hand, that was really fun. I love the meshing of stop motion with 2D. Just mixed really well and created a really fun, unique, creative story that felt so enjoyable. Also, the joke about not being able to see the fight, mwah, chef's kiss, just so good, dude. The stop motion segment is really good, and if it were a full episode of just this, it would probably be way higher on the list. But the other two kind of bring it down a little bit. It's just not quite as good. It was fun though, and screw you, animators. Yeah! The hand that rocks the Mabel is pretty good. I honestly don't have that much to say about it. It's fun. It's a great introduction to Little Gideon. Sorry, Little Gideon. He has just such a fun demeanor that's both amusing, but also creepy and spooky at times. I like Mabel's arc of having to break up with him, and the joke with Wendy was hilarious, where she was just naming ex-boyfriends. That made me chuckle pretty hard. And I liked watching her and Dip's interaction with Gideon, and the final fight is pretty fun and action-packed. The tone isn't awkward in this one, and a lot of the jokes really land. Also, the final shot with Journal 2, that's some good stuff right there, and a great hint of what's to come. There's some great stuff in this one, but overall, it's just kind of fine and shockingly forgettable for setting up the the Mater villain. Shockingly forgettable for setting up the major villain, and I don't know, it just feels kind of unnecessary, believe it or not. And comparing it with the rest of the show, yeah, it's not even close. But for what it is, it's a solid time and pretty good compared to other cartoons. It has some great characters and some really good jokes. It's not a personal favorite, but it's definitely a good episode and you can definitely enjoy it. Just kind of forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Boys Crazy is a pretty solid episode. I really liked Several Times, and I thought the parallels to other boy bands make this a really funny time. Several funny times, if you will. Scratch that off. Also, the setup and reveal of the boys being clones was really funny, and I laughed harder at it than I probably should have when I saw it. I don't really know how to explain it, but this episode reminds me of the pilot a lot, but with a more solid tone. I think it's more the setup of the Mabel love interest being revealed by a throwaway gag. I think that's just pretty clever and funny. And if you're someone who hates Mabel, first off, I hate you. And second off, if you hate her in this episode because she selfishly keeps the boys to herself, you should probably remember that this is a 12-year-old. She's gonna be a little immature given her, you know, age. And be honest, you would keep them too. Look at Big Chris. Beautiful man right there. I can see why she'd be annoying to a few people, but it feels more likable and funny to me than the Dipper and Wendy plotline. Why did Roadside Attraction bring it back? Yeah, I'm still mad about that. Also, I constantly forget and am baffled by the secondary plotline of Robbie's music. Not only is it forgettable, but also, huh? How did Robbie figure out how to mind control people using music? Or did he accidentally do it? Like, why, what? Why is this never brought up again? How does it work? My mind is exploding. I can't fathom the confusion and the amount of possibilities that's made with this plotline. There aren't as many jokes in this one, but there's some bangers in there, and I still laugh at it every once in a while. Solid episode, just not a personal favorite. Carpe Diem is a fun but rather forgettable Gravity Falls body swap episode for me, and it has some really funny moments. Seuss turning into a pig and almost getting eaten by McCucket is top tier comedy, and you can't tell me otherwise. The puberty book is also just hilarious and honestly so much funnier than I thought when I was a kid. There are also a solid number of references to the author in this one that's just really interesting on rewatch. There are some sweet messages, and I like the ending when they come together. Just a sweet little moment that I like a lot. Honestly, it's not the funniest episode. Some great jokes, but like I said, it's more a few moments that stick out rather than a lot of jokes. Good episode that I enjoyed more on rewatch than I expected, but meh, comparing it to the rest of the show, this is a pretty solid spot for it, honestly. Land Before wow, we are just knocking through season 1 now, huh? Land Before Swine is a solid episode with some really cool and fun dinosaur shenanigans. One problem I have is that I honestly don't like either central conflict. Uncle Stan and Mabel's conflict is just a typical liar exposed trope about Waddles being taken, and that's not really good or engaging to watch until the end when it was actually kind of sweet and I maybe ended up liking it. Dipper and Seuss's conflict was really funny and I laughed a lot at it, but it was a bit weird given it boiled down to Dipper is angry at Seuss's cleanliness. It's a little basic and weirdly placed in the season. The dinosaurs were really well animated and their location was honestly pretty sick to look at times. It's overall a pretty solid episode with some great moments and some great action and stuff, but it's got some problems holding it back in my opinion. Mainly the two conflicts that I just don't resonate quite as well with. But it's a good episode. Moving on. Dipper vs. Manliness is probably the episode I disliked the most as a kid. I actually remember skipping this one a lot because I never really cared for it. I probably disliked it more than Roadside Attraction just because that episode was between my favorite episodes as a kid. But looking back on it, this is a pretty good episode. I really like the messaging of this one and I resonated with a lot more on rewatch. Dipper learning to be himself and not go with the definition of a man given by the Manitors is really great, and Stan's comment at the end really highlights it well. I definitely think this episode helped a lot of young guys out there, and that's just awesome. The Manitors are fun for sure, but honestly, they didn't really click with me on rewatch. It's not because of their messages or whatever, it's more just, I don't know, something about them I didn't really like as much as I thought I did. They're fine, they serve their purpose, but nothing special. There are some really memorable jokes in this one, like the pain hole, the multi-bear, the montage songs, and of course, Disco Girl coming through, that girl is you. It's a really fun episode that is a lot better on rewatch than expected, but like a lot of these episodes, comparing it to the rest of the episodes is like comparing the Mona Lisa with my crayon drawings that I made in 4th grade. It's just not quite up to that par. So number 30 might be pretty bad, but it's a pretty good episode that I liked a lot more than I expected. The Deep End is a toss-up for me. On one hand, this episode has some of the funniest sections of any season 1 episode, but on the other hand, the tone. This one is noticeably ripe with the Gravity Falls season 1 tone that I noticed a lot more on rewatch. There's just something about this episode that stinks of weird timing and moments. That being said, this episode is great. Mermando is a really fun addition to this episode, and I thought the idea of a mermaid living in a pool is really creative and fun. Although, how did the chlorine not affect him? Like, shouldn't that poison him or something? Hold on, I looked it up and chlorine poisons fish, so shouldn't he be dead or something? Whatever, I'm getting off track. Honestly, Mermando is probably the only Mabel love interest that I actually kind of liked in this show. They're usually either bleh or I don't like this person. But Mermando is honestly pretty fun, and I liked him, especially his guitar and his interactions with Mabel. They're honestly just pretty fun. The Stan and Gideon shenanigans were really fun. I love how Gideon is basically just a kid in this world, not just an evil villain that Dipper and Mabel have to defeat every once in a while. It's fun to watch him and Stan go at it over essentially a pool chair. Just some dumb fun there. The kid in solitary? Who came up with that? It's such a funny, stupid joke. Poolcheck is also just such a weird character that I jive with a lot, and I honestly found him a lot more enjoyable on this rewatch than I usually did. The main killer of this episode is the tone issues as discussed, and that makes a lot of these amazing jokes either not as good or relatively fall flat, and that's kind of a bummer. It's still really good, and you could definitely enjoy the jokes, but it's just not one of my favorites in the show. Little Dipper is interesting. The shrink ray has always been kind of a weak link for me in the Gravity Falls mystery shenanigan things. I feel the use of the ray was pretty standard and less creative than the rest of the show, although some of the jokes, especially the massive pawn in the background, made me laugh quite a bit. But in general, the plot point kind of felt basic to me. I found the central conflict of Mabel being taller than Dipper a lot more charming on rewatch, and I really liked how it played out and especially how it ended. Also, the sibling bickering between Mabel and Dip, that's realism right there. Seuss is really fun in this one. Bro, what? In my notes, it literally just says, Seuss is epic in this one. Like, how vague can I be? Holy moly. I love the lottery joke towards the end. That always makes me chuckle. The most fun part of this episode is probably going to be Gideon just existing. He's just so fun that any episode he's in is just made a little more enjoyable by him just being in it. I do like this one quite a lot, although in the grand scheme of the show, this is probably the most forgettable episodes in the whole series. It's just a good episode with not much crazy special in it. I do like it a lot though, but we have a lot more episodes to get to, so I'm starting to get sad to see how many season 1 episodes are on the bottom of this list. That just goes to show how good the second season is. Well, continuing with season 1, Fight Fighters is really good. I really liked all the gaming references, and I was honestly shocked at how faithful it felt to the video game genre. Usually with shows like this, references to things like this would usually feel dated and stupid come a few years, but this episode is a blast. The gaming jokes and arcade parallels felt so fun, and Rumble was an amazing addition. He's just such a funny, over-the-top character that I love quite a lot, especially all the jokes about someone killing his father. That's just some really good stuff. The secondary plot line was way better than I remembered, with Mabel trying to get Stan over his fear of heights. It's just pretty fun and charming, especially the line with Stan when he goes, "Nope." There's just some really memorable jokes with this plot line that I think about every once in a while. One massive problem I have with this episode though is that it's really weird how it suggests that Dipper and Wendy actually have a chance of being together. Like, having him compete with Robbie here was a really weird touch. It's just weird to me to suggest that Robbie and Dipper are on an equal playing field with Wendy, because like obviously not. Although I do like the joke at the end with them wanting to kill each other. Top notch with that one. This is a really solid episode though, and I really enjoyed the gaming jokes. There's just some pretty decent problems with this one that bring it down a few places. But overall, pretty good episode. Bottomless Pit is way better than I remembered. It's literally just 3 short stories, but honestly, I loved all of them. I loved the setup of all of them falling into the pit and telling stories to pass the time. And honestly, the animation of them falling in the void is weirdly fun, giving its simplicity. Especially this moment when Dipper's spinning in the background, that made me chuckle really hard. I really liked the Truth Teeth segment, and I thought a lot of the jokes were really solid in that one. Dipper's voice crack segment was great, and I loved the techno remix joke. Although, why would Dipper ever drink anything made by McGucket? If this were real, I would be concerned, but thankfully this is fake. Probably. But I did think that this one was really fun and a sweet little story. The pinball segment is one of the most forgettable things ever, not just in Gravity Falls, just in general. It's not bad. I do like the setting and the jokes were pretty solid, but honestly, I am forgetting the plot of this short as I talk about it right now. It's just pretty standard and basic and not that great compared to the rest of the show. Also, the end with Grunkle Stan falling, that's hilarious. Not much to talk about this one. It's just a couple of short stories that I like for the most part, and they're fun. Summerween is really good. I've always really liked the villain of this episode, and I think this is a prime example of Gravity Falls crossing the Disney line with its darkness. The Trickster is honestly a really cool villain, even for Gravity Falls, and I've always loved its design and its reveal. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, is the Trickster's pronouns it or them? Because it's made out of multiple candy, so it's technically plural. But it's one thing, so is it? That's a doozy right there. The Gordy joke with him literally getting eaten on screen, that's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It's literally one of the things I think about when I think of Gravity Falls, and especially when I think of season 1 specifically. Also, the "I ate a man alive tonight" joke is just comedy gold and one of the funniest jokes in the whole show, and I will fight you on that. And shocker, I don't like the central plot point of Dipper wanting to go to the party with Wendy because it's, you know, him simping over her or whatever. And the thing where he knocks over the candy, like, bro, what? That just makes me pretty mad. I do like how it ties in with Dipper and Mabel growing up and follows the show's central conflict of Dipper wanting to move on and grow up while Mabel wants to stay where she is. I do like that, and it's a great way of showing that, but I still don't like how it's used in this episode specifically that much, just because it's kind of tedious and I don't care for it that much. And I don't care for much of the Dipper-Wendy love story stuff in general, so this episode is really good overall. Great villain, some really good moments, and the characters in the Halloween setting are really charming and enjoyable. It just has a few problems that hold it back from being genuinely great. You Irrational Treasure is a really good episode. I've always really liked the central storyline of the twins discovering a massive cover-up about the 8th-and-a-half president of the United States, and said president is a really enjoyable addition to the show that I'm shocked never got brought back or really mentioned at all. Quentin Tremblay is just such a funny character with a really goofy story that I just vibe with a lot. His interactions with the twins, and especially Mabel, were so fun to watch, and Mabel's arc in this one is just a really cute story about being wacky and fun. The episode as a whole is really fun and a pretty good episode, but there's a few problems with this episode that I think about every once in a while. This episode really feels like one the writers forgot about immediately after making it, because literally nothing in this episode is ever really brought back or expanded on. I mentioned Quentin Tremblay, and I think he's a big example, but like the president's key, how was that never brought back up? I feel like this was going to be a big thing, like this was set up to be a really important moment that would have a really fun payoff, but no, it's never seen again or mentioned again. And honestly, this episode just doesn't feel all that important in the grand scheme of things. Nonetheless, the episode on its own is a really solid time. Great jokes, music, characters, just a great, all that forgettable Gravity Falls episode. The Inconveniencing is a great episode. This is probably the season 1 episode, ignoring the Bill elephant in the room, where I remembered the most from. I've just always been a sucker for this episode. The ghost shenanigans are so cool and honestly pretty disturbing for a Disney show. The music in this one is noticeably really good, especially during the haunting segment when it goes all techno. The rap that killed Ma and Pa is so stupid, but it gets a chuckle out of me every time. This is the first episode that sets up the Dipper loves Wendy plotline, and I know I said I don't like it, but in this episode, it honestly comes off as a lot more adorable and funny, which is preferable to cringing out of my seat while rolling my eyes into my skull. So I'll take what I can get. Also, I don't mind Robbie in this one. He's a character that I feel like a lot of people don't like, but I think he's pretty funny in this one, and the big muffin joke, that joke cracks me up like every time. Also, probably the most underrated joke in all of Gravity Falls, but Grunkle Stan watching the old lady channel and getting invested in it might be my favorite joke out of the whole first season. You know how I mentioned the questionable tone that the first season usually has? Yeah, it doesn't exist in this episode. The jokes are timed well, and the voice cast delivers their line really realistically, and the episode just flows really well from one plot point or joke to another. Yeah, I really like this episode. It's not perfect, but I still love it nonetheless. Oh my gosh, and there's still 22 amazing episodes to get through, so let's get going. Alright gang, we're now entering the episodes I consider to be either really great or personal favorite episodes of television, the 8 out of 10s and beyond. So grab yourself some water, consider this your hydration break. Alright, number 22 is Karaoke. This one I was not looking forward to. As a kid, I didn't particularly care for this one. I think the zombies just scared me or something, because honestly this episode is shockingly good. On rewatch, I really clicked with the zombie designs a lot more, and I thought the whole apocalyptic zombie battle and scene was really cool and fun. That's probably just because I've seen a lot more zombie things now, but I thought this take on zombies, and especially when Seuss becomes a zombie, was really creative and enjoyable. The reveal of Stan knowing about the weirdness of Gravity Falls was shockingly realistic, and I like how it comes out and affects the characters. The jokes in this one are really solid, and I just love the vibe of this episode a lot. I do wish the agents got utilized more though. They're good in this one, and Ron Swanson is always a delight, but I feel like having them in the action might have been more fun than them just getting dragged away. Also, you're telling me that government agents haven't seen anything like this? Like, come on, man. Also, I wish either Mabel or Wendy got turned into zombies, or at least any other character, because how fun would that be? I do like this episode, and I really like how it sets up an additional layer to the journals with the invisible ink. Like a lot of the other episodes, comparing this to the rest of season 2, it's not really comparison. That stuff is just better, but a really good episode nonetheless that I enjoyed a lot. I'm honestly shocked that Love God was able to make it up this high on the list. This is a really good episode, but it honestly loses me a little bit with its messages. I thought the whole thing would be that forcing two people to fall in love using magic would be not cool because, like, duh. But then in the end, Dip and Mabel are like, oh, but they're so happy together. Look at them. Oh. I don't know how I feel about this. Like, why are we suggesting that drugging your friends into a state of forced love is a good thing? Am I the asshole? This just feels really weird to me and morally wrong. I know that sounds like I hate this episode, but honestly, without that ethically questionable ending, this episode is really great. The best part of this episode is the jokes, whether it be anything relating to Thompson or my personal favorite of the episode, the I eat kids balloon joke. How can you not laugh at that one? Like, come on. Also, the action in this one is really fun, and I'm always amazed how people found the message in this scene like 10 minutes after airing. Like, how are people that good? I loved the Woodstock comparisons, and Love God himself was really fun. The episode is great, and I had a really good time. It just had some weak parts and questionable messages that hold it back from being objectively great. The Great Gulf War is such a fun episode. I really like Pacifica in this one, and I love how it sets up her redemption and parental problems. In the Pacifica's rich Mabel, she's cheating at life, is probably one of the most realistic and poignant lines in the whole show. The Gulf people were a really fun addition and twist, and the final fight between them and the kids was just really fun, even though it shouldn't have been that fun. I know Patton Oswalt's voice is everywhere, but anything I see or hear him in just makes me happier. I don't know why. And Franz will have his day, mark my words. The episode just has a fun aura to it that makes it really enjoyable, and the jokes and character interactions make this one really special. But I feel like we should get on to the better episodes, because we're only halfway through, and this recording is hitting, damn, an hour and 15 minutes? Goodness. Into the Bunker is where season 2 starts to develop more about the author, and it really shows in the quality aspect of it. I've always really enjoyed this episode, and one of my favorite parts is that it ends the Dipper and Wendy storyline thing. It ends here. That fanfic towards the end does not count. It doesn't exist. Seriously though, I really like how this episode ends that arc. It's realistic and honestly weirdly a gut punch, despite it being painfully and annoyingly obvious throughout the show that this romance can never be a thing. But the way it's handled is pretty sweet, and I like how it went down. The bunker location and the shapeshifter is a really cool and shockingly disturbing concept that the show just runs with. When the shifter turned into Mabel and Dipper combined, I was about to take a fat stinker in my pants, if I'm being honest. That's spooky right there. But the shifter is just really cool, and I like the misdirect with the author. Even if it is predictable, it's still a really cool moment and reveal. This episode is just really good, and it hits a lot of the highs of season 2 while not being quite as good overall. But despite this, the episode still slaps. Centurion Candidate is a really good episode, and I really enjoyed this one. But honestly, I've never been the biggest personal fan. I really don't like how this episode utilizes Ford, or lack thereof, because he's literally in the beginning of the episode and then pops up like 1 or 2 more times, and that's it. I feel like more of him or a different plot would definitely help with this one, because it feels like he's not really needed at all. Other than that though, this episode is really good. I like most of the jokes, but 1 or 2 kind of made me feel cringe, sorry to say. But the majority of the jokes are solid and funny. I like the idea of Stan running for mayor, and the jokes at the end about his crimes disqualifying him, that cracks me up. I like the mind-controlled tie thing, and the usage of it was pretty fun and creative. And shockingly, I have to say this, I don't like that Gideon is back. It's not him that's the problem, but more that it feels like his introduction comes out of absolutely nowhere, and honestly this show could have used a better and newer villain for this plot. But Gideon is a riot, so I'll let it slide. Although, actually he's not the funniest in this one, so I'm actually not so sure if I like this. I do really like that both Dip, Mabel, and Gideon have to use mind control to win the election, and the comparison was pretty cool on rewatch. The action is good, there's some really great jokes. This is a really good episode, and I liked it quite a lot. Okay, I love Double Dipper. This episode really stuck out to me on rewatch, and I really clicked with it a lot more than I expected. I've always loved the use of the printer to create clones. It's just so creative and fun, and said clone shenanigans made this episode a riot. I love the jokes they make about how they all say and think the same thing. They're just so fun, and also I love Jason Ritter, so more of him makes this episode something special for me personally. I really like the message of this one, of Dip learning to be more himself and not complicate things. It may be basic, but this episode executes this theme really well, and I love that. Also, this episode introduces us to Pacifica, and I know she's a basic character in this episode, but the jokes and character make her really fun. Even if she is literally just that one girl from High School Musical copy-pasted into Gravity Falls, she's still great, along with Candy and Grenda, who also get introduced in this episode. They're just so fun, even in their introduction episode. I don't know if you could tell, but while the scores are close, there's a big jump between this episode and the previous ones in terms of of how much I like them. The other episodes I like a lot, and I think they're great, but they don't click with me quite as much on rewatch. But this episode I just really liked, and it's probably the episode that connected with me the most out of season 1. I just really liked basically everything about this episode. But we have to move on because we got 16 more to go. Blendon's game is honestly an amazing episode. As a kid, I don't think I understood how good this episode really is, but honestly, now that it's been 11 years, holy shit. Now that I'm old, this episode slaps really hard. The first thing I noticed was Seuss's dad's stuff. Holy crap, man. There's something so powerful about watching a kid get over an absentee parent like this. And this episode executes that really well and realistically. I especially liked Nana's rant in Spanish. That hit pretty hard. The time traveler shenanigans and Blendon's return was really enjoyable, but honestly felt kind of rushed, especially Globnar. I feel like watching this gladiator fight would have been really fun and action-packed, but it's just shoved into a quick montage and then it ends. That's a little annoying, but it's still epic nonetheless. Blendon himself just livens up any episode he's in, and I really liked him in this one. Time Baby made me laugh really hard for some reason. It's not even that funny, but just the existence of this character makes me smile. Also, I've always been pretty jealous that I don't have infinite pizza. Like, come on man, why can't that exist? Like I said, this episode is really good, and I honestly felt more emotional over this one than I expected, and it hit really hard in some places, especially the post-credit scene. Like, damn man, that hits. This is a great episode that I had a shockingly great time with. Moving on. The last Mabel corn is a mixed bag. On one hand, the Dip and Ford storyline is amazing and really tension-filled, especially when Pine Tree thinks that Ford is possessed. That scene hits really hard, and I just felt hooked for it. Ford and Bill's storyline being explained like this was really good and explains a lot of who Bill and Ford really are, and I just really liked it. Also, the opening scene for this episode hits unbelievably hard, with Sixer and Bill going at it in his mind, hinting at something darker and impending. That just slaps. And that final post-credit scene is a really good setup for Weird Mageddon. This episode would be top tier if not for the secondary plotline with Mabel and the unicorn. It's good, it's not bad or anything, but it leaves a lot to be desired. I do like the unicorn's design, and they have some really funny voices and jokes. I especially like that the Pure of Heart thing is just made up. That's pretty funny. But this segment is coated with a taste of filler that I cannot scrub out of my mouth. Like I said, not bad, just not up to par with the primary story of this episode. So overall, this episode slaps in some parts and falls kind of flat in others, but I do really like the episode. Even if the unicorn stuff is filler, I can still have a lot of fun with it, especially with Brenda, Candy, and mainly Wendy being more important and enjoyable. I like this episode a lot, despite its shortcomings, but let's move on. Seuss and the Real Girl really stuck out with me as a kid for one reason. Somehow, and I don't know how, this episode predicts both of my biggest childhood traumas. That's kind of embarrassing given what they are. Five Nights at Freddy's and Doki Doki Literature Club. I'm not joking. This is something other people have noticed, but I noticed it as a kid and I was just dumbfounded at the comparison. The evil e-dating game with a sentient AI being the main love interest. I mean, that's DDLC right there. Possessed animatronics in a pizza-themed restaurant. That's FNAF. How crazy is that? The only explanation I have is that Alex Hirsch is a time traveler and he's working with Blendon. Boom, mind blown. Apart from the weird parallels to modern indie horror games with four-letter acronyms, this episode is really good. Giffany is a really fantastic villain, and I'm a sucker for her backstory and interactions with Seuss. Honestly, a few moments here and there, Giffany had some really sick and awesome moments, and I thought it was a really creative idea in villain. The first act of the episode is fun, but honestly the second half, once Melody, I think that's her name, was introduced, is way better. And I really liked her and Seuss's relationship. Once Monica breaks out and takes over Freddy's Pizzeria, that's when the episode really slaps. Great jokes, action, characters, and the defeat of Giffany is really cool. I do wish Melody were more important after this episode because she was really fun and could have added a lot. But I guess she did come back for the finale and one cutaway joke somewhere in the show. So I guess I'll take what I can get. This is a really good episode and I've always enjoyed this one. It's just a solid time with some very interesting parallels to indie horror games. But let's move on. The Time Traveler's Pig is really great. Not only does this episode introduce us to Blendin and the Time Paradox Avoidance Enforcement Squadron, but it also gives us Waddles. Like this chubby little guy. One of my personal favorite touches in the whole show is that in this episode, Blendin has to fix certain anomalies caused by Dip and Mabel, and in the actual episodes, you can see him in the background fixing them. That's just so cool that they had that level of foresight. In terms of the episode though, this one is just really fun. The time travel hijinks that the twins get up to make for some really fun jokes with some really great moments. I especially liked the voting joke. That was really great. Also, the nod to Stanford in this episode really caught me off guard. I always thought this was Grunkle Stan, but no, those are Ford's glasses for sure. Wild how many things this episode set up without me knowing. One thing though is I'm confused how Dipper didn't have any other solutions to his time traveler problem, because all Mabel had to do was prop this little thing up. I feel like they were just more possibilities that they could have done so that Mabel could win Waddles and Dip could win the game. That's just a personal nitpick. It doesn't bring down the scoring really, just weird. I do like how this episode concludes though, with Dip going back so Mabel can win Waddles. Just works really well and it's a really sweet moment. This episode is great. Blendin is really fun. I like the time traveler themed jokes. The laser death ray setup was genius, and Waddles is just adorable. What else can I say? Dungeons, dungeons, and more dungeons. This is so great, man. I'm actually shocked I made it this high up in the list, but this episode is a riot. I'm honestly shocked at how good this episode is, given it follows Not What He Seems and Tale of Two Stands. So it's a shock that they blend Ford's introduction with typical Gravity Falls goofiness so well. They grow Dip and Ford's relationship in a really funny and charming way, with them bonding over a nerdy game. I really liked watching that, and I just really enjoyed the dynamic they had in this episode. Probabilitor is a really fun antagonist as well. He just has some really funny lines that make him stick out in a really good way among Gravity Falls antagonists. I love all the D&D references, and that's coming from someone who hasn't played that much D&D, but I thought the jokes and the connections were really fun. The final battle between Probabilitor and the Pines was really fun, and I loved how it all came together with the message. It took me until this rewatch to get the meta, oh, he has a twin brother, that's the big twist we've been waiting for line. That's just some good self-aware comedy. This episode isn't that deep or engaging as a lot of season 2, but it makes up for it with pure whimsy and dumb fun. Their use of Ford, Dip, and the whole crew make this episode really unique in its feel. I really like it. Society of the Blind Eye, now we're talking. I've always really enjoyed this episode. Even when I was a kid, I loved the concept and execution of this episode. The Society of the Blind Eye is such an amazing concept that this show just runs with so well. And I really like the parallel to secret societies and cults, I think. The society alone makes this episode at least A- tier. What really elevates it is the McGucket storyline and reveal. Even rewatching it, I get goosebumps at this recording. The slow deterioration of McGucket's physical and mental health, the subtle lines that add an extra layer of disturbance to it. It's just so good and such a great reveal for this character we knew basically nothing about. But wow, what a scene. It's just so amazing. I like the jokes in this one, and a lot of the character dynamics are on point, but I was a little disappointed with the use of Wendy in this episode. I feel like there were a lot of things they could have done with her in this storyline, but her only noticeable trait in this episode is considering wiping out her memory to get a song out of her head. Like, sorry? Mabel's reason isn't spectacular either, but it makes sense for the character and with everything going on in the show. But Wendy's was just a little basic and not that good. It's not a huge complaint, it's just a little weird how unimportant Wendy is in a lot of her episodes, and especially in this one. Give her better storylines, writers, come on. Other than that, this episode is really special, and I really love it. It has a darker tone compared to a lot of Gravity Falls episodes up to this point, and I really liked it. But we still have more episodes that are somehow better. Top 10, baby, let's go. All right, number 10 is Gideon Rises, aka the finale to season 1. And damn, this episode is phenomenal. Honestly, adore the tone of this episode. It's much more dreadful and dark and incredibly tense. Gideon is as evil and delightful as ever, and I've always loved the detail that he didn't know there were 3 journals, and the reveal is so entertaining to watch play out. Also, the giant robot, that's amazing. I love how it played in the final fight of the episode. That final fight at the end was a jam and really entertaining. I like the message that Dip gets about being special without the journals. Basic, but awesome nonetheless. Gideon's takedown was really well done and a nice cap off to season 1 with the defeat of the main villain. And the best part of this episode, the use of the grappling hook. The use of it here and nowhere else in the season makes this moment so funny and impactful. I burst out laughing every time I watch this moment. And holy moly, that final scene of the journals in the portal is an amazing reveal and moment that is a perfect setup for season 2. Yeah, this episode is amazing and I love it so much. However, there is one season 1 episode that just takes the spot for best season 1 episode, and that is, of course, Dreamscaperers, baby! This is an episode right here. Dreamscaperers is an amazing episode for one reason. Bill mother flipping Cypher. Do I need to tell you that Bill is an amazing villain? A great design, an amazing and recognizable voice, great jokes, and the pure insanity makes this character a joy to watch. His introduction to this episode is so well done, and I've always loved the weight that this character holds. Without us knowing his full importance yet, just Gideon opening the journal to Bill's page has so much weight and importance to it. We get the feeling that this character is powerful without actually seeing his true power. Yeah, Bill is fire, and this show, and especially this episode, uses him amazingly. But that's not all this episode is. Going into Stan's mind is so fun. The location is so visually stimulating and interesting, and the different doors and memories make for some really fun and interesting jokes. The final battle as well is just really awesome, especially with Kraz and Xyler and the British dog. Also, Bill's final line in the Zodiac is really good foreshadowing for season 2. This episode is great, brought up in score by Bill just existing, but I do have a problem with it. This scene and the whole misunderstanding, Pine Tree not hearing the whole story and getting mad with the whole reveal later, yeah, that annoyed me a little bit. It's not done terribly, but I think the show could have written it better than how they did with this trope. Also, the interactions between Shooting Star, Dip, and Question Mark make this episode really funny at times. I'm a sucker for this episode and I always have been. I love everything about it except that trope towards the middle and end. But other than that hiccup, this episode slaps so hard, but it's just beat by another Bill episode. That being... Sock Opera is so good, you guys. Bill being in it automatically bumps it up to an 8 out of 10, but other than him being here, this episode is just so fun. Shooting Star's Sock Opera shenanigans were so fun, and I found it a lot funnier on rewatch than I did originally. Also, Pine Tree being a ghost and having to speak through a puppet is both hilarious and existentially terrifying. Bipper is also just such a fun creation. Having Bill possess Dip's body and interact through it was so entertaining and cool to watch play out. I also love how this episode has Shooting Star gives something up for Dip for once, especially after all the times Dip sacrificed for her, especially in season 1. It's honestly really sweet and a great moment for her character. I love the darker tone that Bill brings, along with insane jokes he and the rest of the crew provide. One thing I've always believed though is that the password to the computer was Stanford. I know people are gonna be like, oh, Spectacles is smarter than that. He wouldn't do that. Shut up. 8-letter word. Stanford has 8 letters. Boom. Need I say more? But honestly, maybe it was. Who knows? That's just always what I thought it was. This episode is amazing. Bill being delightful and inhabiting Dip's body makes for some really fun physical comedy. There's some fun moments and a lot of great jokes. One thing though that I've never really liked about this episode is Gabe. I don't know why they decided to make Shooting Star's love interest in this episode so bland and boring. He's always felt like a weak link to me, just nothing special, and then at the end he kisses his own puppets and now I'm grossed out. But despite that minor problem, this episode is phenomenal. Puppet boy, you're the boy I love. Now, Weirdmageddon is an amazing trilogy of episodes, and all of them are amazing in different ways, but I've always felt the weakest episode was Weirdmageddon 2, Escape from Reality. Don't get me wrong, this episode is amazing. Shooting Star's fun zone bubble thing was really fun, but also sinister, because you know there's a layer of darkness hiding out of sight, but on the surface it's really fun and charming. Just the idea of Mabel choosing to live in a fake utopia to escape reality is really interesting, and I love how it builds to the climax and reconciliation between Pine Tree and Mabel. Said reconciliation is really sweet, and I love how it plays out. The return of Xyler and Kraz and their philosophical talk at the end makes me laugh every time, and the joke about them having a degree in hunkiness, also criminal and international law, lives in my mind rent-free. It's just so funny. The court case scene is both incredibly funny and also heartwarming, like I said, and when the curse or whatever is lifted, the darker tone that kicks in is great, and I loved it. The episode isn't quite near the best of Weirdmageddon, but it's incredibly good and I love a lot about it. And having a lighter and more chill episode in between the darker episodes is nice, and I like being able to breathe for a little bit. Also, Dippy Fresh's existence is one of the funniest and goofiest things ever conceived. Have y'all seen the alternate ending where Dipper snaps his neck? Crazy. Dipper and Mabel versus the Future is an amazing episode and a phenomenal lead into Weirdmageddon. I've always been a big fan of this episode and how amazing of a transition it is for the show going into the finale. The story is amazing. Both parts fit together so well to create a cohesive narrative. The Dipper Ford and the aliens plotline was amazing. I've always loved the meh joke made by Ford. The action in this section is so palpable and engaging, with some incredible moments that I just adore. Dipper and Ford are such a great pair that you could probably put them in front of paint drying and I'd still be entertained. I love Dipper's growth, realization, and decision, and how amazingly it clashes with Mabel's struggles. Speaking of, Mabel's storyline is fantastic as well, and honestly pretty sad at times. She doesn't want summer to end, high school isn't a musical, and she can't accept that. Watching her fear grow as time moves on is heartbreaking, and you really start to relate to her. I love the final confrontation between Dip and Mabel, and it's pretty sad with some especially beautiful intense lighting that makes the tone even deeper. And wow, is that blend and moment amazing. This and previous episodes were building to something important, and this is the gate being opened to that important moment, Weirdmageddon. And wow, it executes that so well. This is an incredibly special episode that I adore. A perfect transition to the finale and one amazing story to go along with it. Just wonderful. Oh yeah, Northwest Manor Mystery. This episode is unbelievable. The mystery and ghost hunting shenanigans fit in so well with this episode, especially the darker, more monstrous stuff that I'm shocked they could get away with. It just feels like a darker, more Gravity Falls approach to a typical ghost hunting, and oh boy does that ghost make an impact on this episode. The ghost in this episode is amazing. A lower class worker who was exploited for his labor and then tossed aside by the elite of the town is a shockingly adult concept that is so brutally shown and executed. His story is tragically realistic and I just love it. Not what he goes through, of course, but showing tragedies like this one is necessary, and I love that. Also, how did they get away with him getting an axe to the head? Like, holy moly. I like hearing Nathan Fillion's voice, so there's also that. The animation in this one is noticeably really pretty, and I really liked a few scenes and moments in this one. The biggest accomplishment for this episode is Pacifica. Having a character that's so annoying turned into someone you're rooting for in one, maybe two if you count Gulf War episodes, is really impressive. I find it really interesting when shows or movies are able to make me empathize deeply about really rich people. Succession, for example. The Roys are stupid rich, billion to trillionaires, but I'm still able to empathize with the human aspects of them, or at least what's left. And Pacifica is a big example of that. She's really rich, has been nothing but rude the whole show, and then one episode can make me feel for her and her situation. Well done, Gravity Falls writers, just well done. I also really like how she breaks the link of her family and how that ties in with the ghost story. Really powerful stuff. This episode doesn't have a lot of jokes, but the ones it does have make me laugh really hard. The one that comes to my mind in this episode is the "You're the worst" line. This episode is unbelievable. Great animation, dialogue, action, and some really great moments. This is a really special episode that I hold near and dear to my heart. And we still have 5 episodes to go that are somehow better than this. So let's keep going. Weirdmageddon 1 is an amazing episode. I've always loved how this episode introduces us to Bill's hellscape that is Weirdmageddon, and I think the way he says,
Welcome one and all to Weirdmageddon!
is so badass and I love it. There are some really solid jokes in this one despite the darker tone, and I laughed quite a lot. Bill is as delightful as ever, and he's even more insane now, which I didn't think was possible. He's just so awesome, what can I say? There's a lot of death in this episode too. There were a few moments where I was like, oh damn, I just saw someone meet God. What comes to my mind is the guy with the big head munching a guy alive in the car. That traumatized me as a kid. Another thing that traumatized me was this moment. Like, what the fuck? The weird bubble gag was so clever and I loved it, especially the live action with Jason Ritter, who, you know, I'll always love to see. The stakes of this episode are also just so high and so much happens in it. Bro, the journals got burned within like 5 minutes of the episode, and it happens with a snap of a finger. That's just crazy to me. Also, one of my favorite parts of this episode and Weirdmageddon as a whole is that the theme song and intro is like warped and twisted. I adore when shows do something creative like that. My only problem with this episode, and it might be a little nitpicky, but it's that Gideon's redemption was a little rushed. I get why he switched sides like this, and the prison gang makes it really entertaining. It just happened a little too quickly for me. Other than that, this episode slaps. Pine Tree and Ice reconnecting during the apocalypse with Tony, or Toby, I can never remember his name, was really sweet, and I'm really glad they killed the Dipper loves Wendy plotline early this season. This episode is amazing. Great action, apocalyptic themes, jokes, music, just a great time. Going into this, I thought the episode at number 3 would either be number 2 or number 1. And shockingly, this episode just barely falls short of those spots. And that episode is A Tale of Two Stands. Get your tissues ready, because you'll be crying. From laughing, from how tragic this episode is. Seriously though, this episode is a really good time. The story of this one is unbelievable. I absolutely love how it shows the twins' love for each other before breaking them apart. I love how well it ties in every clue that we've been given so far and gives us a complete narrative and explanation of the author and Stan's past, and Dip's reaction to these revelations is so realistic and funny. The explanation of the portal and the use of McGucket is so satisfying, and I love how it all turned out, especially with hindsight. And the final confrontation between the Stans is so hard to watch and shockingly tense. The introduction of J.K. Simmons as Ford was a really nice touch, and I love the introduction to his character. A lesser known actor in this episode is Jonathan Banks as the Pines' dad. I'm shocked I didn't know that Mike was in this show, but that was fun. One of my favorite parts of this episode is just seeing the twins grow up. They're a realistic sibling duo, they're entertaining to watch, and you feel all the emotions they go to. It's just really sweet to watch them grow up and go their separate ways, and it parallels Dip and Mabel really well, especially with how both sets of twins are different but have the possibility of going in the same direction. I also love how the split up was a mistake by Stanley. I usually don't like the liar exposed trope, which this kinda is, but Stan has been known for messing up in the show, and watching it tear his family apart was brutal and realistic. And also, now that I know everything there is to know about physics, I found the perpetual motion gizmo that Ford made pretty funny in a stupid, nerdy way. My only kind of problem with this episode is that a few jokes break the tension a little bit. They're not bad jokes per se, but they can kind of take you out of the story for a second. But there are a lot of well-placed jokes that I love a lot, so it balances out. Overall, amazing episode, but the top 2 are just so let's move on.
I like to be educated.
If you've seen my DreamWorks ranking, you know that I randomly tend to prefer the second place spot over the number 1. I believe the first place episode is the best, having no flaws in my opinion, and being a bona fide masterpiece. But number 2 is my personal favorite, with one of my favorite scenes out of anything coming from this episode. And that episode is Not What He Seems, which, side note, is one of the best titles for any episode I've ever seen. But this episode is perfection. It's one of my favorite episodes of television ever. It is phenomenal in so many ways. I love how guilty Stan looks in this episode, and given everything we've seen him do in the show so far, honestly, yeah, he looks pretty untrustworthy, and using that distrust builds so much tension for the characters and the audience, because what if Stan is a master criminal whose plan is destroying the world? And that mystery is amazing and so well built up with amazing writing and dialogue. I love having Ron Swanson back, and having him arrest Stan leads to some really intriguing and interesting moments. The machine causing gravity to cease for a few seconds makes for some amazing moments with great applications for action and movement. The animation is noticeably stunning in this episode. The lighting, the character movements, the light of the machine, it's just so good looking. The episode weaves so well from one moment to another, creating a very smooth viewing experience. And my favorite part of this episode is the climax. Ooh, it's just so good. The dialogue between characters, the confusion and anger of Dipper, Stan's facial expressions, and Mabel floating up. That's just a masterpiece of a moment. The tension builds so well to this point, and it creates one of the most on the edge of your seat moments I've ever seen. And once the machine does go off, The music is so powerful and rocks your ribcage with the bass, the picture shattering, the light, the destruction it causes. It's so good, dude. And the reveal of the author and that final scene with the stands on the swing, that's just so powerful. My only problem with this episode that keeps it from number one, because I genuinely believe the number one spot is a perfect episode with no downsides, but the only problem with this episode is the jokes. There are some jokes that I know Disney execs forced them to put in because it was too tense or whatever and kids wouldn't understand it, and those jokes bring down the tension for a few moments. The most noticeable was the final line of the episode with the "is this the part where one of us faints" joke. Like, think of how actually funny that would be if Seuss had just fainted without the line. That always bothered me a little bit. Still a 9.8 out of 10, mind you, but something I've always wished they didn't put in. Just let the reveal hit and move on.
I probably feel personally like the strongest episode of the series is Not What He Seems, just because it's such a dramatic episode. When we first pitched it to Disney executives, they thought it was bad because it didn't have a lot of jokes in it. We can gauge how good they are by how much people laugh, and people didn't really laugh that one because it's really tense. So we thought maybe we screwed up, but when the animation came back and we watched it, we're like, oh, it's good that it's tense. Like, it worked.
But other than that, perfection. Great music, animation, voice acting, action, tension. Wow, is this episode mind-boggling on how good it is. Just amazing. But the number one spot is somehow even better than this. That being Weirdmageddon 3 and 4. Take Back the Falls is television at its best. Now, when I was growing up, this episode was one super long episode, but for Disney Plus, they split it up into 2 episodes that were very clearly supposed to be one, given how well they mixed together. But for my ranking, I decided to combine them into how it was supposed to be watched when it was originally made, before Disney streaming got their filthy paws on this episode. Weirdmageddon 3 and 4, like I said, is perfect. I have literally no complaints. I've always been a big fan of when a show brings back every character from earlier episodes and has them go at it with a powerful villain or some threat. And this episode cranks that up to 100. They bring back so many characters for this climactic final episode, and they do it perfectly. The jokes in this episode aren't as packed, but when they're made, they are so funny. The animation is absolutely breathtaking, and I connected with this shot a lot more on rewatch. Bill is as evil and entertaining as ever, and his insanity is just absolutely amazing here. He's as powerful and entertaining as ever, and that makes for an amazing final conflict between the team and Bill. And that confrontation is spectacular. The building of the Shackatron is so fun, and when they use it against Bill, accompanied by a rock version of the Gravity Falls theme, makes it so chillingly epic. And that final meeting in the pyramid is beautiful. Bill's devilish design is one of my favorite versions of him in the whole show. Look at this thing, man. Standing for its talk in the prison was emotional, and a great setup for the final confrontation of Bill, which, like everything else I've said, is spectacular. The switch out is great, and Bill's defeat is perfect. I've always loved his desperation to stay alive, and the final encoded message is just so damn cool. The voice acting for this part shines especially well for both characters, and combining that with the music, the visuals, and the tension up to this point, you get a masterpiece of a scene and one hell of an arc for Stan. I love this moment, and the show perfectly brings Stan's character to this point, and it feels so satisfying to see. Now, one problem a lot of people have with this episode is Stan's recovery. Why erase his memory if you're gonna bring it back anyway, right? And I used to feel this way, but on rewatch, I love how the show does it. For one, this moment couldn't happen if Stan didn't know who Pine Tree and Mabel were, and this moment is beautiful. So why erase his memory? So Stan can sacrifice himself for the betterment of others rather than himself, finally doing something good after a show of mess-ups. It doesn't matter that he remembers, what matters is that he won and Bill lost. That's beautiful, and I love it. Speaking of that goodbye, now grab your tissues, you're gonna need them. The goodbye and bus ride will always be so special to me. The goodbye to Wendy and especially Grunkle Stan just hits so hard, and it is just so sweet and gut-wrenching at the same time. The note Dipper gets from Ice saying see you next summer, come on, that's amazing. And of course the pig goes on the bus joke gets me every time. That is comedy gold right there, and a great example of how to cut the tension with a joke. This episode caps off Gravity Falls perfectly. Summer ends, high school is upon them, and they'll have each other. The show is over, and summer break is over. And this episode is my pick for the best episode of Gravity Falls. And that's the list. Let me know what you agree with or what you disagree with in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. This was a special video for me, and I'm glad I got to make it. Subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching. God bless. Have a good day, friends.